My sister threw a wine glass and had a screaming meltdown at Thanksgiving because I didn't tell her about my pregnancy before announcing it to the whole family. So I announced her biggest secret. Me and my husband Oliver found out I was pregnant in early October after trying for 2 years. We were so excited but also terrified because I'd had an early miscarriage the year before that devastated us. My doctor said everything looked good, but recommended waiting until after 12 weeks to tell people just to be safe. We decided Thanksgiving would be perfect since the whole family would be together, and we'd be at 14 weeks by then. I only told my brother Leo and my cousin Amy because they both knew about the miscarriage and kept checking on me. They promised not to tell anyone and actually kept their word. My sister Gina is 34 and has 4 kids and thinks that makes her the pregnancy expert of the family. She called me the week before Thanksgiving asking if I had any news to share. I said no, just looking forward to seeing everyone. She said I seemed different lately and wondered if something was going on. I changed the subject to her kids and she let it go, but I could tell she was suspicious. The thing about Gina is she literally cannot keep information to herself. When I got into my master's program, I told her first because I was so excited and wanted to share with my sister. She called our mom an hour later and announced it before I could. When Oliver proposed, I called her crying happy tears, and she immediately posted about it online, tagging our entire family before I could tell anyone myself. When I got promoted at work, she told everyone at Sunday dinner before I arrived. She always says she's just so excited for me she can't help herself, but it's really about her being the one with information to share. So this time Oliver and I agreed we wouldn't tell her until we told everyone. Thanksgiving came, and after dinner I stood up and said we had an announcement. I told everyone we were expecting and due in May. Everyone started cheering and hugging us except Gina, who just stared at me. Then she started crying. Not happy tears, but angry tears. She asked how long I'd known, and I said about 6 weeks. She lost it. She stood up and yelled that I was supposed to tell her first. She said she'd told me about all 4 of her pregnancies before anyone else, and I'd betrayed her by not doing the same. She said sisters were supposed to share everything, and I'd made her look stupid. My mom tried to calm her down, but Gina turned on her and asked if she knew. When my mom said no, Gina asked who did know. Amy and Leo stayed quiet, but Gina figured it out and started screaming at them too for keeping secrets. She said the whole family was against her and treating her like she couldn't be trusted. My dad told her to calm down and be happy for me, but she said how could she be happy when I'd deliberately excluded her from the most important news. She said I'd ruined our relationship and she'd never forgive me for making her the last to know. Then she went after Oliver, saying he'd turned me against my own sister. Oliver said we just wanted to wait until we were sure everything was okay. Gina said that was stupid because she would have supported me either way, and now she felt like I didn't consider her real family. She actually said the words, "Real family tells each other everything immediately." The irony was incredible coming from someone who spoiled every important moment I'd ever had. My brother Leo finally spoke up and said maybe if Gina could keep her mouth shut for once, people would tell her things. Gina threw her wine glass at the wall and it shattered everywhere. My 4-year-old nephew started crying. My mom started crying. Gina's husband Jake tried to get her to leave, but she refused. She said she wasn't going anywhere until I apologized for humiliating her. I said I wasn't apologizing for protecting my own announcement. She said I was a terrible sister and she was done with me. She told her kids to get their coats and started packing up the dishes she'd brought. While she was dramatically shoving Tupperware into bags, I stood up and said if we were sharing everything like real family, then everyone should know that Gina had been texting her ex-boyfriend Ryan for the past 6 months. Jake froze. Gina went white. The room went completely silent. Nobody moved. Jake's face changed from confused to hurt in about 2 seconds flat. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Gina's face was white as paper and her hands started shaking. She tried to speak but just made this weird choking sound. Jake grabbed his coat off the back of his chair and headed straight for the door. Gina finally found her voice and started saying it wasn't what I thought, that I didn't understand. But Jake was already out the door. She ran after him and we all heard her yelling his name in the driveway. Her 4 kids just sat there at the table looking scared and confused. The youngest one, the 4-year-old who'd been crying about the glass, started wailing again. My mom jumped up and went over to comfort him, pulling him onto her lap and making those shushing sounds. The other 3 kids just stared at their plates. My dad sat frozen in his chair with this look on his face like someone had hit him with a brick. Amy got up and started picking up the bigger pieces of broken glass from the floor. Leo looked at me with wide eyes but didn't say anything. Oliver squeezed my hand under the table. I could hear Gina outside still yelling at Jake, begging him to wait, to let her explain. Then we heard a car door slam and an engine start. Gina's voice got louder, more desperate, but the car drove away. The sound of it faded down the street and then it was quiet except for the kids crying. Gina came back inside about 20 minutes later. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks, and her eyes were all red and puffy. She stood in the doorway breathing hard like she'd been running. She looked around at all of us and then said Jake drove off and wouldn't answer her calls. She pulled out her phone and tried calling again right there in front of everyone. We could all hear it go straight to voicemail. She tried texting and her hands were shaking so bad she kept having to retype. Then she turned and looked right at me with this expression of pure hate. She screamed that I'd destroyed her marriage and ruined her children's lives just to get revenge over a stupid pregnancy announcement. She said I was evil and cruel and she'd never forgive me. My mom tried to calm her down, but Gina just kept screaming at me. She said I'd planned this whole thing, that I'd been waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate her in front of everyone. Oliver stood up and told her that wasn't true, that she'd started all of this by attacking me. Gina told him to shut up and said he'd turned me against my own family. The kids were all crying now, even the older ones. My nephew, who's 12, had his head down on the table with his arms over it. My dad finally spoke up. His voice was quiet but firm, and he said Gina needed to take responsibility for her own choices instead of blaming me for exposing them. He said she made the decision to text Ryan and she made the decision to lie to Jake about it. Gina turned on him and said he didn't understand, that nobody understood how hard her life was. She started crying harder and sank down into one of the dining room chairs. She put her face in her hands and her whole body shook. My mom went over and put a hand on her shoulder. Gina looked up at her and said she'd been so unhappy for years but didn't know how to fix it. She said being a mom to 4 kids were exhausting, and Jake worked all the time and she felt invisible in her own life. She said texting Ryan made her feel like herself again, like the person she used to be before marriage and kids took over everything. She said she never meant for it to go this far and she never physically cheated, but she knew it was wrong. She kept saying she was sorry over and over, but she was looking at my mom, not at me. My mom suggested Gina should take the kids home and that we all needed space to process what happened. Gina nodded and started gathering up her kids' coats and shoes. She packed up all the dishes she'd brought, shoving containers into bags with shaking hands. None of her kids would look at her. The 12-year-old grabbed his little brother's hand and led him toward the door. Gina didn't look at me even once while she was leaving. She just herded her kids out to her van and drove away. After they left, Amy got the broom and dustpan and swept up all the tiny pieces of glass. Leo and I cleared the table without talking. My mom was crying quietly at the kitchen sink. My dad just sat at the table staring at nothing. Oliver helped me carry dishes to the kitchen. The whole house felt heavy and sad, nothing like how Thanksgiving was supposed to be. Oliver and I left about an hour later after helping clean up. The drive home was quiet at first. Then about halfway there, I just started crying. I couldn't stop. All I could think about was how I'd wanted this to be a happy memory of announcing our baby, and instead it turned into this horrible disaster. Oliver reached over and held my hand while he drove. He said Gina's choices weren't my fault. He reminded me that she'd attacked me first, that she'd thrown a glass and had a complete meltdown over me not telling her about my pregnancy early. He said I had every right to defend myself after she came at me so hard. I knew he was right, but I still felt terrible. I kept seeing Jake's face when I said about Ryan and how it changed from confused to completely broken. I kept hearing Gina's kids crying. Oliver pulled into our driveway and turned off the car. He hugged me and let me cry on his shoulder. He said we were going to be okay, and the baby was going to be okay, and that was what mattered most. We went inside and I took a long shower and cried some more. Oliver made tea and we sat on the couch. He put on a movie, but neither of us really watched it. The next morning, I woke up and checked my phone. 17 missed calls from different family members. There were texts from my mom, my dad, Leo, Amy, and even some cousins I barely talked to. The longest text was from my mom asking me to explain how I knew about Ryan. I called her back right away. She answered on the first ring. I told her the whole story about how I saw the text on Gina's phone last month when she asked me to check a message while she was driving. I said I'd seen Ryan's name pop up with a bunch of heart emojis, and when I opened it, there were dozens of messages going back months. I said they were flirty and inappropriate, and I'd been carrying that knowledge around not knowing what to do with it. My mom sighed really loud. She said she wished I'd told her privately instead of announcing it like that in front of everyone. I said I wished Gina hadn't thrown a glass and screamed at me for protecting my pregnancy announcement. My mom went quiet for a minute. Then she said she understood I was defending myself, but that the way I did it caused a lot of damage. I asked if she'd talked to Gina, and she said Gina called her at 3 a.m. hysterical. She said Jake still wasn't answering Gina's calls and Gina didn't know where he went. My dad called me separately about an hour later. He said he supported me and thought Gina needed a wake-up call about her behavior. He said she'd been acting entitled for years and treating people badly without consequences. But he also said he was worried about Jake and the kids. He asked if I knew anything else about the Ryan situation beyond what I'd said at dinner. I told him I only saw a few flirty texts, but didn't know how deep it went. I said I didn't know if they'd met up or if it was just texting. My dad said Jake was probably trying to figure that out too. He said he hoped they could work it out for the kids' sake, but he wouldn't blame Jake if he couldn't get past it. We talked for a while about the whole mess. He said holidays were supposed to bring families together, but this one had blown everything apart. Before we hung up, he told me to take care of myself and the baby, and not let all this stress affect my pregnancy. 3 days went by with no word from Gina. I texted her once to ask if she was okay, but she didn't respond. Leo called and said he'd driven by her house and her van was there, but nobody answered the door. My mom was worried sick and kept calling Gina, but Gina only answered once to say she was fine and needed space. Jake finally responded to my dad's messages on the third day. He said he was staying at his brother Justin's place and needed time to think. My dad asked if he wanted to talk, but Jake said not yet. That same afternoon, Justin called my dad. Justin wanted to know what exactly happened at Thanksgiving because Jake wouldn't give him details. My dad explained the whole thing from start to finish. He told Justin about my pregnancy announcement and Gina's meltdown and the wine glass, and then me revealing about Ryan. Justin was quiet for a long time after my dad finished. Then he said Jake had shown up at his door Thursday night looking destroyed and had barely spoken since. He said Jake just sat on his couch staring at the TV without really watching it. Justin asked my dad if he knew how serious the thing with Ryan was. My dad said none of us knew for sure, but that Gina had admitted to texting him for months. Justin said this was going to get ugly, and he hoped everyone was ready for it. I spent the next few days basically hiding in our apartment. Oliver had to go back to work on Monday, so I was alone with my thoughts and my phone, which kept lighting up with messages. Most of them I ignored. Leo showed up on Tuesday evening with Chinese takeout and let himself in with the spare key we gave him. He set the bags on the counter and pulled out plates without asking if I was hungry. I appreciated that he didn't make a big deal out of it. He just started opening containers and dishing out fried rice like it was any normal Tuesday. We ate at the kitchen table and he told me Gina had been all over Facebook posting weird status updates. He showed me his phone and I read through them. One said something about how blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Another was about how some people will stab you in the back when you least expect it. The comment section under each post was full of relatives asking what was wrong and if she was okay. Leo scrolled further and showed me one where our aunt had commented, asking if this was about Thanksgiving. Gina had responded with a crying emoji and said some people in the family had shown their true colors. I felt sick reading it. She was making herself look like the victim when she was the one who threw a glass and screamed at me. Leo put his phone away and told me not to let it get to me. He said anyone with half a brain could see through Gina's drama. But I knew that wasn't true because not everyone had been there to see what actually happened. Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Amy. She said her mom had called her that morning asking about Thanksgiving. Apparently, someone had told Amy's mom a totally twisted version of events. According to what she heard, I had announced Gina's private business in front of everyone just to embarrass her because I was mad she didn't know about my pregnancy first. Amy said her mom actually asked if that was true. Amy told her the real story, but she wasn't sure her mom believed her completely. I texted back asking who told her mom that version, and Amy said she didn't know, but it had to be someone from Gina's side. I was so angry I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Gina was out there spinning the whole thing to make me look like some horrible person who went after her on purpose. She wasn't telling anyone that she had a complete meltdown at my pregnancy announcement, or that she threw a wine glass at the wall. She wasn't mentioning that she screamed at me and demanded an apology for protecting my own news. I texted Amy back and told her I couldn't believe Gina was doing this. Amy sent back a string of messages saying half the extended family probably thought I was the bad guy now. She said Gina had always been good at playing victim and making people feel sorry for her. I knew that was true, but it didn't make it any less frustrating. Thursday morning, my mom called. I almost didn't answer, but I knew she'd just keep calling until I picked up. She asked how I was feeling and if the baby was okay. I told her everything was fine physically. Then she got quiet for a second before saying she wanted to have a family meeting on Sunday. She said everyone needed to sit down and talk through what happened calmly, like adults. She specifically said Gina and Jake were invited if they would come. I felt my stomach drop. The last thing I wanted was more family drama. I told my mom I didn't think that was a good idea because I didn't need the stress right now. She said she understood, but that we couldn't just let this fester and tear the family apart. I said Gina was the one tearing things apart by lying about what happened. My mom sighed and said that was exactly why we needed to talk face to face. After I hung up, I told Oliver about it. He was loading the dishwasher and he stopped to look at me. He said maybe we should go so we could tell everyone our side of the story. I wasn't convinced, but he pointed out that if we didn't show up, Gina would control the whole narrative. He was right. I texted my mom back and said we'd be there. Sunday came way too fast. Oliver and I drove to my parents' house and my stomach was in knots the whole way. When we walked in, Leo was already there sitting on the couch. Amy showed up a few minutes later. My parents were in the kitchen making coffee and setting out cookies like this was some normal family gathering. Then Jake walked in alone. He looked terrible. His eyes were red and he had dark circles under them like he hadn't slept in days. My mom asked where Gina was and Jake pulled out his phone to show us a text. It said she refused to be in the same room as me and that she had nothing to say to any of us. My dad shook his head and muttered something under his breath. We all sat down in the living room and it was super awkward for a minute. Nobody knew how to start. Finally, Jake spoke up. He said he'd confronted Gina about Ryan the night of Thanksgiving after they got home. She'd admitted everything. Jake's voice cracked when he said they'd been texting every single day for 6 months. He said she'd also confessed to meeting up with Ryan for coffee twice, once in September and once in early November. My mom put her hand over her mouth. Jake kept talking. He said Gina swore nothing physical happened between them. No kissing, no touching, just talking. But Jake said it didn't matter because she'd been having an emotional affair and lying to him about it for half a year. Leo asked if Jake believed her that nothing physical happened. Jake said he didn't know what to believe anymore. He said he'd checked her phone records and the text to Ryan went back even further than 6 months. More like 8 or 9 months. He'd also found emails between them that Gina had deleted, but that were still in her trash folder. Jake said reading those emails made him feel sick because Gina had been complaining about him to Ryan and telling Ryan she missed the way things used to be between them. My dad asked what Jake was going to do. Jake said he was thinking about separation. He said he couldn't stay in the house right now because every time he looked at Gina, he felt angry and betrayed. He was staying at his brother's place and only going home when Gina took the kids somewhere, so he could grab more clothes. Then Jake looked right at me and asked if anyone else in the family had known about Ryan before Thanksgiving. Everyone said no, except me. I admitted I'd known for about a month after seeing the texts on her phone. Jake nodded slowly like he was processing that. He didn't seem mad at me. He actually thanked me for telling him even though it came out the way it did. My mom spoke up then. She said maybe I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have pulled Jake aside privately instead of announcing it in front of everyone. I felt my face get hot. I told her Gina was literally screaming at me and throwing things and demanding I apologize to her. I said I wasn't thinking about the best way to handle anything in that moment. I was defending myself after she ruined what was supposed to be a happy announcement about my baby. My dad jumped in and backed me up. He said Gina had created this whole situation with years of not respecting boundaries and with her own choices about Ryan. He said I shouldn't be blamed for finally standing up to her. My mom looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Leo changed the subject a little. He said this wasn't really about the pregnancy announcement anymore. He said Gina and Jake needed to figure out their marriage without dragging all of us through it. Jake agreed. He said he was going to tell Gina that if she wanted to save their relationship, they needed marriage counseling. He said he couldn't move forward without professional help because the trust was completely broken. After everyone left, I felt drained. Oliver drove us home and I stared out the window the whole way. That evening, I got a Facebook message from someone I hadn't talked to in a while. Nora Hensley. She was a family friend who'd known my parents for years. Her message said she'd heard about what happened at Thanksgiving and wanted to reach out. She said she'd been through something similar with her own sister about 10 years ago. Her sister had boundary issues too and would share Nora's private information with everyone. Nora said it took her years to figure out how to set firm boundaries and stick to them. She offered to talk if I wanted advice. I messaged her back and we ended up talking on the phone for over an hour. She told me about specific things that had worked for her, like being really clear about what information was okay to share and what wasn't. She also said sometimes you have to accept that certain family members won't change and you have to protect yourself accordingly. Talking to Nora made me feel less alone. She got it in a way that people who haven't dealt with this kind of thing just don't. 2 weeks went by. Gina didn't contact me at all during that time. I heard updates through my mom and Leo. Gina and Jake were going to counseling. Jake had moved back home, but they were sleeping in separate rooms. Gina had blocked Ryan on everything and sent him some message saying she was wrong and needed to focus on her marriage. I didn't know if that was true or just what Gina was telling people. Then on a Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Gina. It said we needed to talk in person without everyone else around. My hands were shaking when I read it. I showed Oliver and he asked if I wanted him to come with me. I said yes immediately. I wasn't ready to face Gina alone. I texted her back and suggested meeting at a coffee shop near our apartment. She agreed. We set it for Saturday morning at 10. Saturday came and I barely slept the night before. Oliver and I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early. I ordered a decaf latte and we sat at a table in the back corner. Gina walked in right at 10 and she looked awful. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail and she had no makeup on. She had dark circles under her eyes that matched Jake's. She sat down across from us and immediately started crying. She said her whole life was falling apart. She said Jake barely looked at her anymore, and her kids kept asking why Daddy was sleeping in the guest room. She said she couldn't eat or sleep, and she felt like she was losing her mind. Then she looked at me and said throwing the wine glass was wrong. She said there was no excuse for it and she was sorry. I didn't say anything. I just waited to see what else she would say. Gina kept crying and said she'd been jealous of me for years. She said everything seemed to come so easily to me. My education, my career, my marriage to Oliver. She said she felt stuck and unhappy, and watching me succeed at everything made it worse. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Gina had always seemed so happy with her life. 4 kids, a nice house, a husband who worked hard. Meanwhile, I'd been struggling to get pregnant for 2 years and dealing with a miscarriage that broke my heart. I thought she had everything figured out while I was the one who couldn't get it right. But here she was telling me she felt trapped. She said being a mom was all she did anymore. She said she loved her kids, but sometimes she forgot who she was before them. She said watching me travel for work and go out with friends and have time for hobbies made her feel like she'd given up everything. She said she knew it was wrong to resent me, but she couldn't help it. She wiped her eyes with a napkin and said, texting Ryan made her remember when she was young and had her whole life ahead of her. She said it was stupid and she knew it wasn't real, but it felt good to have someone ask about her day and care about what she thought. Oliver reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. Gina looked at both of us and said she was sorry for throwing the glass. She said she was sorry for ruining my pregnancy announcement. She said she knew she had a problem with needing attention and being the first to know things. She said it made her feel important when she could share news before anyone else. She said her therapist was helping her understand why she did it. She said Jake told her he wanted counseling or he was leaving. She said she'd already had 3 sessions by herself and they were starting couples counseling next week. She said she was trying to change, but it was hard. I sat there for a minute just processing everything. Then I told her I forgave her for Thanksgiving. I said I understood she was going through stuff, but I needed her to respect my boundaries from now on. I said that meant not sharing my personal news without asking me first. I said it meant not making my moments about her. She nodded and said she would try. She asked if I would consider doing family therapy with her eventually. She said her therapist thought it might help us rebuild our relationship. I said maybe after we both had some time to work on ourselves separately. She seemed okay with that answer. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. Then Oliver and I got up to leave. Gina hugged me before we walked out and it felt different from usual. Less performative, more genuine. In the car, Oliver asked how I felt. I said I was cautiously hopeful but still hurt. I said I wanted to believe Gina was really changing, but I'd heard promises before. He said we'd take it one day at a time and see what happened. When we got home, I took a nap because the whole thing had drained me. A few days later, my dad called and said Jake had reached out to him. Jake told my dad that he and Gina were starting marriage counseling with someone named Aaron Simmons. My dad said Aaron specialized in dealing with affairs and trust problems. Jake had moved back into the house, but he was sleeping in the guest room. He told my dad he had conditions for staying. Gina had to be completely honest about everything with Ryan. She had to go to individual therapy. She had to respect boundaries with her phone and social media. My dad said Jake seemed serious about making it work, but also serious about his expectations. I was glad Jake wasn't just letting it slide. Gina needed to face real consequences. My next doctor appointment was 2 days after that conversation. Oliver came with me like he always did. The ultrasound tech measured everything and said the baby was growing perfectly. My doctor came in after and checked my blood pressure. She said everything looked great. She asked how my stress levels were, and I admitted the family drama had been rough. She said she could tell from my last appointment that I was tense. But she said this appointment showed the baby was doing fine despite everything. She reminded me that I needed to take care of myself and not let family stuff affect my health. She said the baby needed me to stay calm and healthy. I promised I would try. That weekend, my phone buzzed with a text from Gina. She sent me a photo of a piece of paper. It was homework from her therapist. The assignment was to write down every time she'd crossed someone's boundaries and think about making amends. I zoomed in on the photo. My pregnancy announcement was at the top of the list, but there were so many other things. She'd told my mom about Leo's girlfriend before he could. She'd posted about Amy's new job before Amy announced it. She'd shared my cousin's engagement news in the family group chat. She'd told people about my dad's health scare when he specifically asked her not to. The list went on and on, 12 different incidents just on the first page. Seeing it all written out made me realize this wasn't just about me. Gina had been doing this to everyone for years. I texted her back and said I appreciated her being honest about it. She sent back a heart emoji. My mom called me a week later sounding worried. She said Christmas was coming up in a few weeks. She asked if I thought we could all get together without more drama. I said I didn't know, but I was willing to try if everyone else was. She suggested doing something casual instead of a big formal dinner. Maybe just appetizers and games at our house. Nothing fancy. Lower pressure. I said that sounded better than trying to recreate a normal holiday. She said she'd talk to everyone else and see if they agreed. A few days later, she texted our family group chat with the plan. Everyone responded saying they were okay with it. The following Saturday, Leo and Amy came over to help us start setting up the nursery. Oliver had painted the walls the weekend before. Now we needed to put together furniture and organize baby clothes. Leo worked on assembling the crib while Amy helped me fold tiny outfits. She held up a onesie that said, "Mommy's Little Miracle," and made a joke about how at least my baby would have plenty of stories about family dysfunction to learn from. I laughed because it was true. This kid was going to grow up hearing about the Thanksgiving when Aunt Gina threw a wine glass. Oliver brought us pizza for lunch and we ate sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes. It felt good to focus on something positive instead of all the drama. By the end of the day, we had the crib built and the dresser assembled. The room was starting to look like an actual nursery. On Tuesday, I got a notification that I had mail. I went down to the mailbox and found a letter from Gina. No return address, but I recognized her handwriting. I opened it while walking back upstairs. It was 2 pages long. She started by saying her therapist helped her write it, but the words were all hers. She said she was sorry for every time she'd stolen my moments. She listed specific examples going back years: my graduation, my engagement, my promotion. She said she understood now that she did it because she felt invisible in her own life. She said making herself the messenger made her feel important and needed. She said it was selfish and wrong. She said she'd hurt me over and never really apologized before. She said she wasn't asking me to forgive her right away or trust her again immediately. She said she just wanted me to know she understood what she'd done and why it was wrong. She said she was committed to changing even if it was hard. There were no excuses in the letter. No, but I was just excited, or I didn't mean to hurt you. Just straight accountability. I read it twice and then showed it to Oliver. He said it seemed like real progress. I agreed, but part of me was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Christmas came faster than I expected. My mom called the week before asking if everyone was still okay with the casual gathering idea. I said yes and asked if Gina was planning to come. My mom said Gina confirmed she'd be there with her family and seemed excited about it. I felt nervous, but also curious to see if the changes were real or just temporary. Oliver reminded me that we didn't have to stay long if things got uncomfortable. We could always leave early if Gina started acting like her old self. The morning of Christmas Eve, my dad texted me saying he'd talked to Jake the night before. Jake told him the marriage counseling was actually helping them communicate better for the first time in years. He said Gina had been completely open with her phone and told him everywhere she went. She blocked Ryan on all her social media and messaging apps. She even wrote Ryan a message before blocking him saying she was wrong to talk to him and needed to focus on fixing her marriage. My dad said Jake seemed cautiously hopeful that they could work things out. I texted back asking if he thought Gina would actually keep it up, or if this was just temporary. My dad said only time would tell, but he'd never seen her take responsibility like this before. We arrived at my parents' house around noon, and Leo was already there helping set up appetizers. Amy showed up right after us with a cheese board she'd made. The house felt relaxed instead of tense like Thanksgiving had been. My mom had put out board games and card games on the coffee table. She made it clear this wasn't about a fancy meal or perfect decorations. Gina arrived with Jake and the kids around 1. I watched her walk in carrying a wrapped present and a casserole dish. She spotted me across the room and gave me a small wave. Not the dramatic hug she usually forced on people, just a simple wave. She set her stuff down and came over to where Oliver and I were standing near the fireplace. She asked how I was feeling and if the pregnancy was going well. I said everything was good and the baby was healthy. She smiled and said she was really happy for us. Then she actually walked away to go help my mom in the kitchen instead of standing there dominating the conversation. I looked at Oliver and he raised his eyebrows like he was thinking the same thing I was. This was different. Throughout the afternoon, Gina kept surprising me. When Leo started telling a story about something funny that happened at his job, she listened instead of interrupting with her own story. When Amy mentioned she was thinking about getting a dog, Gina asked questions instead of immediately giving advice. When my dad brought up my pregnancy and asked how I was handling the symptoms, Gina let me answer without jumping in with her 4 pregnancies worth of expertise. She was present, but not overwhelming. She participated without taking over. We played a few rounds of cards, and Gina laughed at jokes and seemed genuinely relaxed. Her kids were running around playing with toys, and she wasn't constantly hovering or making everything about being a perfect mom. Jake looked more at ease than I'd seen him in months. He actually smiled when Gina made a joke about her terrible card hand. Before we ate dinner, Gina pulled a wrapped box out of her bag and handed it to me. She said it was for the baby, and she hoped I liked it. I opened it and found a handmade baby blanket with little stars and moons sewn into the fabric. It was beautiful, and clearly took a lot of time to make. I thanked her, and she said she'd been working on it for the past few weeks in her free time. She didn't make a big announcement about it or try to get everyone's attention. She just gave it to me quietly and seemed genuinely happy when I said it was perfect. After dinner, my mom pulled me into the kitchen while everyone else was cleaning up. She hugged me and said thank you for giving Gina another chance. She said she could see real changes in her daughter, and it meant everything to have both her girls getting along again. I told my mom I was still being careful, but I had to admit Gina seemed different today. My mom said she'd been praying for this, and watching Gina actually work on herself gave her hope. I said I was hopeful too, but I needed to see if Gina could keep this up long term. My mom understood and said that was fair. We went back out to the living room and spent the rest of the evening playing games and talking. Gina stayed until around 8 and then said her kids needed to get home for bed. She hugged everyone goodbye, including me. It was a normal hug. Not too long or too tight. Just a regular sister hug. She told me to text her if I needed anything and then left with her family. After they were gone, Leo came over and asked what I thought. I said I didn't know what to think because it was so different from how Gina usually acted. He said maybe the whole Thanksgiving disaster actually shocked her into changing. Amy joined us and said she was impressed because Gina didn't try to make a single thing about herself all day. Oliver said it was definitely progress, but we should stay cautious. I agreed. One good day didn't erase years of boundary stomping, but it was a start. The first week of January, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Gina. She said she was calling from her therapist's office because Aaron wanted to know if I'd be willing to come to one of their sessions. He thought it would help if we could talk through our relationship issues with a professional there to guide the conversation. My stomach dropped because the idea of sitting in therapy with Gina sounded terrible. But then I thought about my baby and how I wanted them to have a relationship with their aunt and cousins. I asked Gina if this was something she actually wanted, or if Aaron was making her do it. She said she wanted to try because she missed having me as her sister. I told her I needed to think about it and talk to Oliver. She said that was fine and to let her know. I hung up and immediately called Oliver at work. He said it was my decision, but he thought it might be good to have a neutral person there to make sure the conversation stayed productive. I talked to Amy that night and she said the same thing. Leo said he'd support whatever I decided. I spent 2 days thinking about it before texting Gina that I'd come to one session. She sent back a thank you message and said Aaron's office would call me to schedule. 3 days later, I walked into a small office building and found the right suite number. Gina was already sitting in the waiting room looking nervous. She gave me a weak smile and I sat down across from her. Neither of us said anything while we waited. A door opened and a man in his 40s with glasses came out. He introduced himself as Aaron and shook my hand. He led us both into his office and we sat on opposite ends of a couch. Aaron sat in a chair facing us and thanked me for coming. He said the goal today was just to start opening up communication, and he'd help make sure we both felt heard. He asked me to start by explaining how Gina's behavior over the years had affected me. I took a breath and said it made me feel like I couldn't trust her with anything important in my life. Every time something good happened to me, she had to be the one to tell everyone else first. It made my accomplishments feel like they belonged to her instead of me. I said the pregnancy announcement was the final straw because I'd already lost one baby and needed to protect this one. Aaron nodded and asked Gina if she understood what I was saying. Gina's eyes were filling with tears, but she said yes. She said she never thought about how her actions made me feel because she was too focused on how being the messenger made her feel important. Aaron asked her to explain that more. Gina said she felt invisible in her own life most of the time. She had 4 kids and a husband, but felt like she'd lost herself completely. When she got to share other people's news, it made her feel relevant and needed. She said it was selfish and wrong, and she understood that now. I felt myself getting emotional hearing her admit this stuff out loud. Aaron asked me how it felt to hear Gina's explanation. I said it helped me understand why she did it, but it didn't erase the hurt. Gina nodded and said she wasn't asking me to forget everything. She just wanted a chance to be better. Aaron said that was a good place to start and asked if we were both willing to work on rebuilding trust. We both said yes. I spent the next few weeks going to therapy with Aaron and having coffee dates with Gina, where we practiced talking without falling into old patterns. She was trying hard to listen, instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. Oliver said he could see the difference in how she acted around me. My belly was getting bigger every day, and I felt the baby moving more and more. Gina texted me one morning asking if she could stop by that afternoon. I said yes, and she showed up at 2 with a bunch of containers. She brought freezer meals she spent all morning making. Casseroles and soups and pasta dishes all labeled with cooking instructions. She said she wanted to help after the baby came and figured having ready-made dinners would be useful. I was surprised and touched because she didn't have to do that. She asked what else I might need, and I told her I wasn't sure yet since this was all new to me. She said to let her know anytime and that she didn't expect to be in the delivery room or anything. She just wanted to be helpful however I was comfortable with. I thanked her and she left after about 30 minutes. Oliver came home from work and saw all the food in the freezer. He said Gina was really making an effort, and it showed. 2 weeks later on a Tuesday night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I felt a weird cramping sensation. I stood up and felt water running down my legs. My water broke right there in the living room. I called for Oliver, who came running from the bedroom. He grabbed the hospital bag we packed weeks ago and helped me to the car. The contractions started getting stronger on the drive, and I was breathing through them like we learned in the birthing class. Oliver called my parents from the car and told them we were heading to the hospital. My mom answered and asked if we wanted her to tell Gina. I said yes, because even though we weren't as close as we used to be, she was still my sister, and I wanted her to know. Oliver dropped me at the emergency entrance and went to the park while a nurse got me in a wheelchair. They took me up to labor and delivery and got me into a room. The doctor checked me and said I was already 4 centimeters. The contractions kept getting worse, and I asked for the epidural. The anesthesiologist came and put in the needle, and after about 20 minutes, the pain got better. Oliver sat next to me holding my hand while we waited. My parents showed up around 10 and sat with us for a while. My mom kept telling me I was doing great, and my dad looked nervous. Labor went on for hours and hours. I was exhausted and just wanted it to be over. The doctor kept checking my progress, and finally around 8 the next morning, she said I was ready to push. Oliver stood next to me, coaching me through each push. After what felt like forever, I heard crying, and the doctor said it was a girl. They put her on my chest, and she was perfect. Tiny and pink with a full head of dark hair. Oliver was crying, and I was crying, and we couldn't believe she was finally here. The nurses cleaned her up and weighed her. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. They handed her back to me wrapped in a blanket, and I just stared at her face. My parents came in first to meet their granddaughter. My mom cried and held her while my dad took about 100 pictures. They stayed for an hour before leaving to let us rest. Leo and Amy came next, bringing flowers and a stuffed giraffe. Amy held the baby and said she was beautiful. Leo looked scared to hold her, but finally did, and smiled the whole time. They left after about 30 minutes. Gina showed up last with Jake carrying a big gift bag. She walked over to my bed and asked if she could hold her niece. I said yes and passed the baby to her. Gina's face just melted looking down at her. Tears started running down her cheeks and she whispered that she was so beautiful. She told me I was going to be an amazing mom. She only stayed 20 minutes before handing the baby back and saying we should rest. She and Jake left, and I felt good about how she handled it. She respected the boundaries without me having to remind her. The first few weeks at home were harder than I expected. The baby cried all the time and I barely slept. Oliver helped as much as he could, but he had to go back to work after 2 weeks. Gina texted every few days asking how things were going. She offered specific things like picking up groceries or coming over to watch the baby so I could nap. She didn't just show up like she used to. She waited for me to say yes before coming over. One afternoon, I was so tired I couldn't think straight, so I texted her asking if she could come hold the baby for an hour. She was there in 15 minutes. I went upstairs and slept while she rocked the baby downstairs. I woke up feeling so much better. She had also done my dishes and folded the laundry. I thanked her and she said that's what sisters do. It felt different from before. She was helping because I asked, not because she wanted credit for it. At the 2-month checkup, the pediatrician said the baby was healthy and gaining weight perfectly. She said I was doing a great job as a first-time mom. Oliver and I were starting to figure out a routine. We knew her different cries and when she needed to eat or sleep. Having family around to help made everything easier. My mom came over once a week to give me a break. Leo brought dinner sometimes. Gina checked in regularly but never pushed to come over if I said I was busy. The whole family was being respectful and supportive in ways they hadn't been before. Gina and I met for coffee when the baby was 10 weeks old. We sat outside at a cafe near my house. She told me therapy was helping her understand herself better. She said she realized her whole identity got wrapped up in being a wife and mom, and she forgot who she was. She started taking art classes at the community center on Saturday mornings. She joined a book club that met twice a month. She was finding things that made her happy outside of her family. She seemed lighter somehow, less desperate for attention and validation. I was proud of her for doing the work. My dad mentioned to Oliver one night that Jake told him their marriage was better than it had been in years. Jake said he and Gina were actually talking honestly for the first time. They weren't just going through the motions anymore. The whole crisis with Ryan forced them to deal with problems they'd been ignoring. Jake said he was grateful they got the chance to rebuild instead of just letting things fall apart. Gina was being completely open with her phone and her schedule. She was putting in effort to make Jake feel secure again. It was working. On the baby's 3-month birthday, we had everyone over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just pizza and salad. My parents came and Leo and Amy and Gina's whole family. The kids played in the backyard while the adults sat around talking. Gina helped set the table and kept the kids from getting too wild. She complimented Amy on her new haircut and asked Leo about his job. She wasn't making everything about herself. She seemed genuinely interested in other people. She held the baby and played with her, but handed her back when she started fussing instead of insisting she could calm her down. Everyone got along without any tension or drama. It felt peaceful in a way our family gatherings never had before. That night, after everyone left, I rocked the baby in the nursery. She was almost asleep in my arms. I thought about Thanksgiving and how terrible it was. The screaming and the broken glass and all the hurt feelings. But it led to real changes. Gina got help and fixed her marriage. We learned to communicate better. Everyone started respecting boundaries. Our family was healthier now than it had been in years. I was happy my daughter would grow up knowing her aunt as the person she was becoming. Someone who was working on herself and trying to be better, not the person who needed to be the center of attention all the time. I was grateful we all found our way here even though it was messy and painful getting to this point. The baby fell asleep and I put her in the crib. I stood there watching her breathe for a few minutes before going downstairs to Oliver.